Hi. So I'm not David. This is David over here. But just to give one more notice for the Linaro guys that who've been going to Linaro Connect. There's a dinner and celebration evening tonight. So you must be outside the convention center at 5:30 to get the bus to go for that. It's our pleasure basically to introduce David to you. He's architecture program manager for at ARM and has been very heavily involved in rolling out the 64-bit architecture. There's been some big announcements from ARM over the past week or so, and it's a bit of a coup actually for UDS and for Linaro Connect to get David here. I think this is the second public talk on big.LITTLE and 64-bit and so on. So it should be a really interesting few minutes. So David, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I can live up to the billing. And you've got the warm-up act from warm-up act after lunch with a Scottish accent. So what I'd like to use this 15 minutes to talk to you about, as Steve mentioned, we've actually had quite a lot of announcements in the last couple of weeks. So in V7 architecture, which is the variant that's pervasive today and from ourselves and architecture licensees, we announced A7, the latest in that line of implementations from ARM. And that also introduces a concept we're known as big.LITTLE. And I'll go and explain a little about the nomenclature there in a minute, where we're using the A15 and the A7 to maximize power efficiency and basically extend. ARM is well known for power efficiency, and it's key to us going forward. I'd then like to just touch on a bit about ecosystem development. There's an awful lot happening around platform development, system engineering, etc. And then finally, version 8. That's the next version of our architecture, which was announced last Thursday. So it is hot news off the press, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. So just to start things going, the A15, a couple of new features around virtualization and a large physical address. So we changed the page table format to be able to cope with a large physical address, 64-bit entries. That was about a year ago. The parts are we've done our early access of our RTL to our lead partners. 14 partners to date, 9 of them announced as listed here. And we do expect lots of products coming out in the 2012 timeframe. So this is very much the processor of the here and now. You'll see more A9 designs, etc., etc. And this new member of the family is our new top right offering from ARM. As I mentioned in the agenda, the A7, this was introduced just 2 weeks ago. And it's, in fact, we're billing it as not just a highly efficient, it's probably the most efficient core from ARM in this A class of machine, where the A profile, for those of you that know the architecture, is where we have memory management, virtual memory support. Of course, ARMs go across such a broad spectrum that it's a key market for us, this part. What I wanted to illustrate with this graph was that if you take a look at the curve for this is showing the A15's power performance versus the A7, and when you have a microarchitecture aiming for high performance, you definitely pay a level of penalty with the number of gates you're carrying in terms of the overall leakage. So as you can see from the red line, with the A7, because it doesn't have the same peak performance, you can be much more efficient. And so this is a theme where we come in with our big.LITTLE. Of course, big, we've used lowercase because it's all relative. I mean, ARM cores are comparatively small and efficient, but we believe pack a fairly sizable punch. And little is even smaller, but again, very efficient. So the key point here about it is, as well as both these cores support the same architectural features, and so we can swap software context, in fact cluster context in an MP system from one cluster to the other, and that's the key concept behind this big.LITTLE approach. So going into a little bit more about the processing and why we think this is all a very good idea. It's all about using the right processor for the right job. So everybody's under pressure now to provide more and more richer experiences to users, higher resolution screens, etc., and increasing amounts of mobility. And so with that, battery technology is not growing at the same exponential rate as expectations, so we have to start being a bit more clever around how we provide that experience and maintain or even increase battery life going forward. So from looking at the tasks on the right-hand side, to be always connected and always on and have the experience, playing music, doing a level of web browsing and viewing sites, messaging. Some of us even still make phone calls on these devices, looking at email. These kind of tasks well within the budget of an A7 processor. And whereas on the right-hand side we're showing tasks such as video editing, video encoding, web page rendering, gaming, etc., that's where you may need a bit of a boost. And I think probably many developers here can never get their hands on too much performance. So you get things that benefit much more. But the overall average is to maximize battery life with the appropriate processor for the job in hand. So our readings of this has indicated that we believe that over a typical use of a mobile device, we can see 70% energy savings by using this dual approach and effectively swapping between the appropriate cluster. So this is just to illustrate a little bit more about the performance and energy. So if you take a look at the illustrations of the pipelines for an A7 versus an A15, a number of boxes relate in many respects to the number of gates, the amount of leakage that you're going to get. So we've got a situation with the A7. It's a simple in-order 8-stage pipeline. It does have a limited amount of dual issue. But taking its performance, and we're using as a benchmark here the A8 processor, which is in many smartphones today. We actually, with the advantages of what we've done in the microarchitecture and also the way process technologies have moved on, we are getting greater than an A8 performance out of this core for about a sixth of the power. And then if we look at the bottom side, this is our most advanced microarchitecture to date. So we've got out-of-order execution, multi-issue, a lot more buffering in queues, and up to 5 times 8 in terms of the performance offered. And so what we believe in the future will hold is hybrid devices using both of these, because the overhead of the A7 in silicon area, etc., is dwarfed by the benefits that one will see for power budgets and battery life. That said, we do expect that the A7 processor will be key to many entry-level smartphones in a couple of years' time. And so, bearing in mind that an entry-level smartphone is a high-end phone today, we would anticipate $500 smartphones today, as in $500 without a contract, will probably be a $100 price point with an A7, and it will be the bigger designs that will take over in a couple of years' time. So what I've done here, it's probably a little bit of an eye test for people, but you should be able to get the slides available afterwards. But trying to illustrate what happens in the migration. And I only want to make a couple of points here. The central section, which is, whether it's clear to people in a sort of an orange color around saving state and restoring state, for gigahertz processor operation, all our tests are showing that it's around 20 microseconds of switch time. So you have 20 microseconds of dead time when you move from one cluster to the other. This is a small piece of software we're calling virtualizer software. It runs at a hypervisor level of privilege, for those familiar with those pieces of our architecture, and it does that context switching, cluster migration for you. So that's the only amount of dead time. And then after that, as I'd shown in the previous slide, they each had a level 2 cache that's coherent. You keep the L2 cache stays warm and snooped until it's had a chance to clean, and then you can actually shut down the L2 cache of the cluster that you've migrated off. So the response dead time is 20 microseconds. It'll take a bit longer to drain down the caches, but you get the extra advantage of taking them cold in terms of power management. So that's the kind of a high-level guide to what's behind this big little concept. So moving on from that, that's really all I've got to say about the A7 and A15 themselves. But if you look at the ecosystem and all the software there's a very broad range of support already for A-class processors. And of course, all this software does run. So software on A5s, A8s, A9s all runs on these processors. The one thing that these designs bring is with the large physical address spaces, we've now got 1 terabyte of address space. And so that's a pretty healthy platform, particularly where it takes us outside the bounds of sort of the 2 gigabyte memory constraints if you assume a 50-50 split between memory and I/O. So we're pretty excited about the amount of software platform development and sharing we're going to be able to do as these things gradually make their way into the marketplace. Linaro, of course, who are sponsors of half of this event, is key to a lot of the Linux and ARM and a lot of the work that's going on here to help consolidate what we're doing in both tools, kernel development, and many of these related areas of platform support. And the point I do want to emphasize is that while we've got a lot of stuff emerging and a lot of work on V7, I think this really does open the door to a logical extension to V8, which I'll come on to a minute, because this 1 terabyte platform of physical address is a very good platform for us to develop the larger virtual address space software on as well. So building on the ecosystem things as well, what do you do in the absence of silicon? Well, you model it, and ARM's got quite a strong line in modeling technology called fast models, which is where, in fact, developments on A7, A15, and our architecture developments, both V7 and V8, have been done to date. So the right-hand picture is actually a screenshot of the kind of things we can do. So within a modeling environment, we can actually bring up a server, and we can run Mozilla, etc., and display pages. So we've got a basic LCD controller, and of course we've got memory and I/O, interrupts, timer, etc. And on the left-hand side is an illustration of kind of the core components of what a big.LITTLE system will look like. So we believe that's the sort of typical compute subsystem for 2012, and we have V8 equivalents of it as well. So I'm expecting this type of technology to migrate more into things like the Linaro organization. We've got many of our silicon partners use this technology with us when they license implementations, and so it's a way of us feeding the system ahead of silicon, and with all the time to market pressures on everybody, that problem's not getting any easier. You can no longer sort of wait for FPGAs or silicon to start many of these developments. Which brings us on to the last bit of this talk and the V8 announcement. One of the reasons for actually making the announcement now, it is an architecture announcement. We don't have any implementations at this point, but you have to start oiling the wheels of industry. So I've mentioned these models, I've mentioned what can be done with V7, and so V8, we need to start talking about how this stuff will manifest its way in, and in particular, I've had a great opportunity this week to talk to a few Linux kernel developers and people about how we can then transition the early work that we've done in-house out into the wider ecosystem over the next year. So what is V8? Well, it is the next version of the architecture, and it's A profile, which means it's got a memory management unit and is virtual addressing. 64-bit capability is the main differentiating criteria for this. So now we've got that 64-bit execution state, which we're referring to as AArch 64. But as I mentioned at the start, we have a heritage of low power, and so we've been very critical and doing a detailed critique and features as we've put them into this architecture, that we don't believe they will have undue penalties on power performance and area. It's key to our future going forward. Having said that, compatibility is a huge important criteria. There's so many billion chips per year shipping now from ARM. It's an awful lot of software out there, and it can't all just switch overnight. So we're now knowing that our current architecture in 32-bit world we're referring to as ARCH32, and the term we use for transition between the two and the relationship between the two is interprocessing, and we've chosen that word carefully because those of you familiar with the existing ARM architecture, we have interworking between two instruction sets within the 32-bit. This is interprocessing, and it's the moving between our 32-bit and 64-bit architecture and how they coexist. I've got a little bit more on that as well. And finally, it is all about maintaining momentum. This is not the end of the road of the 32-bit architecture by any means. We're introducing V7, we expect is going to live for a long while with things, and it will continue to develop well into the future alongside the V8 offering and having a strong 32-bit presence. So I think this just summarizes sort of what I said around the architecture. So all the features go forward, and in the left-hand side of the V8, you can see we have the existing ARM and thumb instruction sets, which we're referring to as A32 and T32, a new instruction set for 64-bit. And the main difference is actually in the SIMD area, where we now have double precision float in our SIMD environment in the 64-bit world, whereas it was single precision float only in the 32-bit one. If we look at the register file, it's a bit larger than what it was in the traditional ARM. We now have 31 general purpose registers with register 30 designated for procedure link registers. So when you make a procedure call and return, that's where the address is stored. There's also 32 now 128-bit vector registers, and they're used for scalar floating point as well, both single and double precision. And then to meet the new exception model, and I'll explain a little bit more about the EL terminology, we have for every given exception level, stack pointer, and for where the levels that support exception entry, we have a link register, which is the similar model that we brought in with the virtualization extension on V7. So there's a lot of things here that have moved forward. In fact, you could argue a prototype within the A7 and A15 product offerings. And then some saved processor state. The PC and the CPSR in the end are in brackets because architecturally software can read the PC, but it can't write it. And the CPSR similarly, accesses are much more limited than our BAST architecture based on what you actually need to do. So I have a slide to summarize the exception model. EL0 is the user space. 1 is where kernels would run in supervisor, hypervisor 2, and the monitor at 3. And the thing here is, again, we have a security model within the ARM architecture which effectively offers you 2 address spaces, and the monitor is the means of transitioning between the two. So I've shown here both 32 and 64-bit, and a couple of things to highlight. Compatibility, it's actually all running in EL3 for the 32, and that's because the monitor runs with the same privilege. In the 64-bit world, the monitor runs a different privilege from the operating system, and you have the option of a couple of stack pointers where you always use the handler stack pointer on entry to an exception, but you can switch to the user stack point, so you can always have a situation that you won't have stack overflow and exception entry. And the interprocessing thing I mentioned before, the one rule that I want to give you here is as you move up or down the hierarchy, you can make the change at one point to the 32 rather than the 64-bit architecture. So we never get a situation where something at a higher privilege is at a smaller register width, if you like. So it's, you never get a situation where a 32-bit hypervisor would need to look at a 64-bit operating system, for example, and try to save the context. It's a one-way street, 64 to 32, as you move down the hierarchy. In terms of the registers, I showed you what the 64-bit was. This is what the traditional ARM32 did, and if I do this, you actually find that they map very nicely into the new world because we had a lot of banked registers and they actually support across. So this is how we do our save restore on the context switch. And that is my whistle-stop tour. So in summary, the A7 announced 2 weeks ago, highly efficient processor, very excited about the opportunities for it in its own right as well as in the big.LITTLE context. We believe it's going to have a major impact on the performance, battery life, mix, and styles of products that we can use there. And the important thing is this seamless transfer across clusters. Increasing investment in platforms. These platforms are now a terabyte of space, so they naturally flow onto V8. And that is well advanced. ARM will be announcing implementations next year, but we expect it's a sort of 2014 timeframe before they'll be prototyping it in product. So it is a view of the future for you. I should also add here that in our V7 consolidation, by the end of this month, we'll be bringing out a new version, an overdue version of the current ARM architecture to Rev C that will bring together all the architecture features I mentioned around the A7. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hey there. Great to be here. For those of you, this is probably a little bit different than what you've heard earlier in the day, but what I wanted to do is respond to questions as much as anything else. I've got 15 minutes. OIN is an open invention network. It was formed by a whole series of companies early on, recognizing that SCO was litigation that was, for those of you who are not aware of it, was litigation that rose up in the early part of the last decade, and it turns out it was funded by Microsoft through a variety of cutouts, and essentially it was a vehicle to try to slow or stall the advances of Linux. And so with that as the backdrop, companies like IBM, Red Hat, Novell, Sony, NEC, Philips got together and said, hey, if patents are going to be the battleground here, we better be careful. We better make sure that patents are not something that can slow or stall the progress of Linux, because they recognized at that point that Linux was going to expand out in ways that are somewhat unpredictable and it's going to grow. I don't think they had any conception of how to expand into the mobile space or what that mobile movement would mean for the desktop in terms of backing in and particularly capturing the consumer spaces we're just starting to see right now as smartphones are migrating to create a different dynamic in terms of what consumers want and need and the form factors of what consumers use, be they tablets or alternative devices that are run really by your smartphone. And so what happened is that they created an entity, they funded it with tens of millions of dollars, there's a lot of money and it's bottomless, which shows you the importance. When IBM first invested $1 billion in '99 in Linux, they basically put a stake in the ground and said, we're all in, and that's why they have more developers inside IBM who are working under contract IBM than anywhere else. They recognize that they need to do this. Obviously, Red Hat is Linux. If they disappear, then if Linux disappears, then they no longer exist, which wouldn't be great for their investors or anybody else, because we want to have vibrant choices in the community. And obviously, the bet that Mark's made is founded, powerfully founded on Linux, and so we want to support companies that are supporting and depending upon Linux's growth. What we do is acquire patents, and we acquire patents that are beneficial to provide deterrence against those who are potential antagonists to Linux. By having that portfolio, we have the capacity to utilize it ourselves, to defend companies. We have the capacity to forward deploy it, to put it into companies' hands so that they can deter litigation, or if they're in litigation, that they can more effectively defend themselves. The whole idea is to discourage patents from being something that disrupts the progress of the wonderfully elegant, self-organizing, self-regulating community that is open source and Linux. You want creativity to occur, and you don't want to be constantly looking over your shoulder and second-guessing, because what patent wars are designed to do is to create a collapse of sense-making, to alter your focus on what you're doing and move you to a position where you're like, well, I'm not so sure I want to go with this platform or that platform because there's a lot of litigation. The thing that we're trying to do and working with companies on a regular basis is we're looking to create that détente with the potential aggressors and antagonists. I have regular dialogues with the people at Apple. I have regular dialogues with the people in Redmond. The whole idea is to have them understand that we're prepared to do whatever's necessary with this patent portfolio and with the significant amount of capital that we've accumulated to be able to protect and support the community. Our real goal is to enable through the license. We provide a license to all of our patents. We have fundamental patents on e-commerce, fundamental patents on PHP, so pretty much every web page that's created, well, 98% anyway, are created in PHP or some variant on PHP. We have lots of interesting patents in a variety of application areas, over 420 US patents, close to 600 global patents and applications. The idea is we don't use any of those for offensive purposes. We only use those to support counteroffensive activities where a company's been attacked, or we're looking to create some equivalence by putting them in the hands of a company that's about to be attacked. And we're closely associating ourselves with an increasing number of companies that are driving forward, like Canonical, like driving forward solutions that are whether they be distributions. We focus a lot on the top 100 distributions, like Red Hat, Novell's distribution. We focus a lot on supporting companies like Canonical that are growing in a variety of ways to be able to create, to serve needs in the market, just like Google and Android. We're agnostic to platform. So people constantly will tell me, I'll get questions from audiences because I speak all around the world, and they'll say, oh, well, aren't you really just supporting the Android platform versus what's now called Mango or the platform, the iOS platform? And I said, that's missing the point completely. What I'm supporting is an alternative way of creating value in the new economy. And it's done through this process of collaboration, cooperation between companies, between individuals to be able to create new. And that's where the real value is for the macroeconomy, is creating new, not just incremental innovation controlled by those who live in silos. The idea is to bust the silos down and allow for communication and the transfer of ideas across what were historically silos, to allow people to partake of something that an economist in the early 60s at Stanford called increasing returns. Some people call it network effects, which is a shorthand for it, but Ken Arrow developed this concept, or noticed this concept as what was happening in the economy when you allowed creative people to get together. One of the former presidents of HP, Lou Platt, called it that his job was really to hire a bunch of smart people, put them in a room, and hope they mate. Well, the mating process is much more dynamic when you're talking about open source, because things don't just happen inside that silo that is HP or that silo that is IBM, but it happens across. And 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, it equals 30. And that's the kind of enablement we're trying to provide by making sure, insofar as we can, that patents are not a deterrent or roadblock to the level of innovation that you can get and the inventiveness that's captured, that's resident within the development community. And so the stars of the show are you guys and the people that are driving out new products, services, and implementations. What we're trying to do is just be in the background to make sure that if there are fights that need to be fought, that we're there to support and fight them, arm in arm with companies that are our members, as well as a growing group of associate members, as well as just, the unique thing about OIN, we're not like any other defensive patent activity. There's something called RPX, there's something called IV, Intellectual Ventures, which is more offensive than defensive. You've got Allied Security Trust, you've got a whole range of these things, because you've got, you don't just have operating company dangers, so to speak. You've got dangers that come from that are less focused on Linux, but more focused on just return on investment. Billions of dollars in the last 10 years have gone into patent speculation. People buying up patents and then asserting them and litigating because they know people are going to settle more often than take it to term. So it's not about having absolutely fundamental, essential patents. It's about taking advantage of the system, because it costs you $3.5 to $5 million to defend a suit. It costs you that's in district court in the U.S. It costs you $8 to $12 million to defend an ITC action. So big expenses. A lot of companies, you get sued. It's not about whether you're going to lose, because if you win, you take it to term, and you have to spend $3.5 to $5 million. What if you really won when you probably could have settled for a few $100,000 off the bat? So that's what a lot of these trolls take advantage of, is that whole dynamic. And so what we're trying to do is try to interdict troll behavior, work with some of these other defensive activities, and defensive organizations. But unlike these other defensive organizations where they're supporting an individual set of members, our members I do nothing for. The people who fund me, which is very unusual, which is part of the oddity of what OIN is. My whole role is to support the weakest links in the chain, the people that don't have patents, the people that don't have the ability to defend themselves, people that don't have capital, but they just have good ideas, they have creativity, which is their fungible asset. What we're looking to do is protect the weakest links in the chain, because those are the portions of the community, the segments of the community that get exploited. Very much the strategy of some of these companies that are antagonists to Linux is to hunt the stray gazelle or antelope that they can take down, and you take them down and you start to develop momentum. So when you look at the Android licenses or Linux licenses, as they were calling them before that, there aren't a lot of the patents that, when you look at the patents, these so-called Android licenses, there isn't any patent in that portfolio that's being licensed to companies like HTC and Samsung and others that actually reads on Linux. Those patents, the reason why they're licensing is because they have patents which they claim. I'm not validating that these claims are accurate, but they claim, and they've been able to convince people that they actually have some relevance. It's active synchronization, which is something that that we should have another way of doing that. But active synchronization, Microsoft believes is something that they have patents on and that people should pay them for. But that's what people are licensing. They're not licensing anything else that's related to Linux, and active synchronization is agnostic to the underlying platform or OS that it runs on. Active synchronization is just making sure that everything on your smartphone gets to the smartphone at the same time, generally the same time it gets to your PC or your tablet or whatever other device, sub-notebook. So we're here as a resource. We'd like people to participate in the community. There are lots of great ideas that have never been codified. So if the community actually created something called defensive publications, which are just codifying your ideas, it means that no one else can ever invent and get a patent on that idea. We'll facilitate it, we'll pay for it, every defensive publication that comes forward. So it's just basically, we'll take the equivalent of an electronic cocktail napkin, send it into us, we'll work with you to put it in a format that actually can serve a benefit in the patent and trademark offices. It means that no one can ever use your idea to restrict, which is really what patents do. They limit other people's access to technology. And so rather than support that notion, which I think is antithetical to a lot of the positions that open source community members have, let's not focus on just patenting. Let's focus on defensive publications, codifying ideas. We're working to try and make code searchable, in the past code searchable. We're working on future code, how that can be made searchable. Through the compliance process, developing a way of creating some record of information of the invention. We're very active in something called Linux Defenders, which we've founded, which deals with trying to find prior art. If we can find prior art as a community through crowdsourcing that allows us to limit the effect of a troll lawsuit or of an operating company lawsuit, an antagonist, what we'd love to be able to do is utilize that prior art to request re-exams at the patent office and get a patent declared invalid. because many patents are out there that should have never been issued, as we all know. It's unfortunate that, you know, I've talked to Richard Stallman about this many times, is that I recognize that you kind of had to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but early on, when you're driving a transitional movement, you have to be unequivocal, and you can't have a lot of nuance. But now I think is the time for us to kind of say, well, it's not that we're embracing patenting, but what we're embracing is a notion that we need to put our ideas in a format that other people can see, and it can serve the benefit of discouraging patenting. So if we raise the bar on what's patentable, that only higher quality ideas ultimately get patented, then we've provided that much more protection for the community. And so that's something that we're actively involved in as well. Does anybody have any questions? Or please go ahead.
So I'm going to ask you a quick question first.
Yes.
Something you haven't covered is being a licensee. So there are lots of people in the room from many companies or who represent themselves as individuals who contribute to Ubuntu. Can you explain to them how they can become a licensee and what that means? Sure.
Licensing is royalty-free, fully paid up. It means you don't pay anything. There are no dollars that come to us. We don't have any model to actually... We're a total loss-driven company. We avoid the appearance of generating revenue because we live in a community where we have to be the whitest of white hats. We recognize that. So we're not on any slippery slopes where we make money here or we make money there. We don't make money. We have no interest in making money. We have only an interest in seeing that the community flourishes and grows, period. And as a result, our license is free and it's in perpetuity. So patents that we have, you'd have access to the 600 global patents that we have, royalty-free. You just have to sign a license, and you have to agree as consideration. From a contractual standpoint, we can't just give you access. You have to give something to us, and we thought, well, what could you give to us that's part of the community compact, if you will? And so what you give to us is your commitment that you're not going to sue based on the patents you own, that are different from the patents we grant you rights to, that you're not going to use those patents to sue based on Linux grounds, and that you're not going to be in a position where if you do have patents that are part of the Linux system, that you grant a royalty-free license to everybody else who signs an OIN license. So now we have 400. We just went over 400 licensees. So we've increased the number of large companies as they become more committed to Linux, like HP and Cisco and LG and AMD soon, Samsung soon, we believe. These kinds of companies are all moving in the direction, and they've signed licenses or about to sign licenses. And so we have dozens of large companies that will be signing licenses, and many that have signed this year to get us. We've signed 250 licensees. We've been around for 6.5 years. I've been running this for 3. In the last year, we've signed 250 licensees. So there's a groundswell of support and recognition that this is an important part of good hygiene, a good defensive hygiene in terms of growing a business. Yes?
Keith, the median industry response to GPL v3 has focused very heavily on things like the anti-TiVoization clauses. And so it seems that industry at large has really developed or started with an aversion to GPLv3. But GPLv3 also has a bunch of clauses that might act as a damper in an escalating sort of patent war situation. Do you see any scenario where the pain of intercompany sort of litigation reaches the point that companies start to look at ways in which they can use GPLv3 to start trending things in the opposite direction?
Possibly, Mark. That's probably not a great, the detailed answer you're hoping for, but I think it's possible. But I think before that, what happens is that a rationalization starts to occur, and markets have a tendency toward order. And whether it's the secondary market for patents or whether it's the market for smartphones. And so what we're seeing now is a movement back toward a recognition that, I mean, I gave an interview and someone did an article a couple weeks ago which states what my position is. You've got a lot of companies that are supporting Linux who are the foundational companies in mobile communications, in that arena, which I think, as I described, affects so much of computing because of what's happening in this migration out to the consumer, to cannibalize the consumer market with smartphone devices and smart edge devices. And so what you're seeing is an early stage recognition. There's still battles that are being fought, and litigation will go on, but companies that come with touch technology, so you know like Apple essentially has patents that are in the arena of gesture that they bought from another company 5 years ago. As I described, Microsoft has patents in another area that they think are relevant, but they're not broad-based Linux patents that are that threatening, and they're not that relevant to the key to mobile devices is that you can communicate. What they have is particularly what Apple has is not enabling communication. And so they have a fundamental problem is they need access to the patents that are controlled by these other companies that are supporting mobile communications and invented mobile communications. And so over time, you'll see a balancing. You'll see the community coming together to cross-license. There'll be a cost associated with it, but there's a cost on both sides. And the incumbents we should not lose sight of are the companies that are supporting Linux. These other companies have never had large share in the mobile space until quite recently, and their share is declining.
Okay, we're running out of time.
Sorry.
Hey, obviously there are companies in the industry who strongly believe in defensive patents. They bid on them for millions and billions of dollars. Can you briefly explain how it's possible for a patent to be both usefully defensive and valid at the same time? Because if it's going to be usefully defensive, then it seems it has to be likely that a competitor is going to infringe on it. And if it's going to be likely that they're going to infringe on it, then why wasn't it obvious to anyone in the state of the art?
I hope I understood the question. The strategy behind defensive ownership of patents, you own the patent, even though others are infringing on it, you're making it readily available. It's like any of the patents that Google's acquiring, any of the patents that Red Hat owns, they're all readily available to whomever wants a license to them. And so you can manage this process of having defensive patents because you need them in case you're attacked to be able to counter-assert against the company that's attacking you to create equivalence in negotiating position so that you're not going to get essentially really taken advantage of on terms and conditions because you've got something. And so what was the other part of the question? How can you use those patents for?
Sorry, we're actually out of time, but you will be around all day?
Yeah, I'll be here all day if
Okay.
anybody has questions. And this was designed to be an overview and provoke and stimulate ideas. So thank you very much.
Thank you.